You know, in any language, we learn about nouns and verbs. It's like rule number one, right? A person, place, or thing, and an action. Seems pretty simple. But what if a language didn't quite see it that way? Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating and kind of controversial theory in Chinese grammar that questions the very line between these two basic building blocks of speech.
Okay, so let's really think about this for a second. It seems so obvious. A noun is a thing, a verb is a doing word. But what if a language starts to, well, blur those lines? In Chinese, this simple question cracks open a surprisingly complex and, believe it or not, a pretty intense academic debate.
So, let's kick things off with the radical idea that started this whole conversation. It's a theory that, at first glance, is actually incredibly elegant. It basically asks, what if verbs aren't their own separate thing at all? What if they're really just a special kind of noun? This idea is called the noun-verb inclusion theory, or Mingbao Dang in Mandarin. The core concept is pretty straightforward. Just imagine the category of nouns is this giant bucket. This theory says that the entire category of verbs is just a smaller bucket that fits completely inside the big one.
And this visualizes it perfectly. You've got nouns, that's the biggest circle there, marked with the character ming, and it completely swallows up verbs, the middle circle, dong. It's a really neat, tidy little hierarchy. Simple, right? But is it actually correct?
So why on earth would anyone even propose this? Well, the main argument is based on a really interesting feature of Chinese grammar. See, verbs can often show up as the subject or object of a sentence, the jobs that are usually reserved for nouns. And they do it without any special changes. So the logic is, if it can act like a noun, it must be a noun.
But you know how it goes with any bold new theory. It didn't take long before other linguists started kicking the tires. And, as we're about to see, they found some pretty serious problems with the basic logic it's built on. So, let's break that down.
To really get the critique, we need a super quick refresher on a classic form of logic, the syllogism. You definitely learned this in school. It's that classic, if A is true and B is true, then C must be true structure. A solid syllogism is really the backbone of any sound argument.
Now, as the linguist Jin Lixin laid out in a 2022 paper, this right here is the core syllogism holding up the noun-verb inclusion theory, and you can see why it's appealing. It seems to make sense on the surface. Nouns do this job, verbs can also do this job. So, conclusion, verbs must be nouns.
But hang on a second. Does that A plus B equals C logic really hold water here? Let's try plugging some different words into that exact same logical formula and just see what happens. And boom, this analogy from the paper just instantly shows you the problem. Using the exact same reasoning. Gold glitters. Right, glass also glitters. Okay, therefore, glass is gold. We know that's completely absurd, right? It shows that the reasoning itself is fundamentally broken. So the huge takeaway here is this. Just because two totally different things happen to share one common property, whether it's glittering or being able to act as a subject in a sentence, that does not mean they belong to the same fundamental category. The logic just falls apart.
Okay, so the core logic is pretty shaky, but what does the actual language tell us? I mean, is there hard evidence that nouns and verbs behave differently in Chinese? Well, it turns out the answer is a big, resounding yes.
To find these differences, linguists use a tool called syntactic distribution. It sounds really technical, but all it means is, where can a word legally show up in a sentence? What other kinds of words can it be next to? For a language like Chinese, which doesn't have a ton of word endings, this is basically the main way you tell different word classes apart.
And this table just lays out the counter-argument so brilliantly. That 2022 paper found at least 13 different patterns where nouns and verbs act in completely opposite ways. I mean, just look at the first row. Verbs can be negated by the word bu, like in bu chu, meaning don't go. But nouns can't. You can't say bu zhuozi for not table. Or check out classifiers. You can say iga ren, one person, but you'd never say iga so, one go. You see this again and again. They follow totally different rules. So, the takeaway from all this data is pretty much unavoidable. Nouns and verbs are not in some simple parent-child relationship. They operate in fundamentally different ways. They have their own unique playbooks within the grammar of the language.
But the critique didn't even stop there. A more recent paper from 2025 by Jin Lixin and Wang Zhangshang dug in even deeper. They looked at the specific rules the theory's proponent had laid out and found that, funnily enough, they actually undermine the theory itself.
Okay, let's just look at a few of these. The theory pointed out that bu only negates verbs, while may can negate both.
But the critique says, wait a minute, that's not proof they're the same. That's proof they're different. The very existence of a verb-only negator like boo proves that verbs have their own exclusive club. And it's the same story for connecting words like bing and question words like zemyang. They are reserved for verbs, which proves that verbs are in fact their own separate class. The 2025 paper also pointed out another pretty significant scholarly issue. The theory's proponent had cited the work of a famous linguist, Richard Larson, to back up this idea of a supernoun category. But if you actually go and read Larson's original work, he was talking about how adjectives and prepositions can have supernominal properties, and he never once included Chinese verbs in that group. It really looks like the source was misinterpreted to make it fit the theory.
So, at this point, you might be thinking, okay, this is a cool academic smackdown, but why should I actually care? And that's a fair question. But this debate isn't just theory for theory's sake. It has some very real consequences for how we understand, and maybe more importantly, how we teach and learn languages.
You see, having clear, distinct categories for words like nouns and verbs is just essential. It's how we figure out the fundamental structure of a language. It lets us create precise, predictable rules about how to build sentences. If we just oversimplify and lump everything together, it might seem cleaner, but we're actually hiding the very distinctions that learners need to get a handle on.
Just try to put yourself in the shoes of a language learner. If you tell them that verbs are basically just nouns, that's really confusing. But if you teach them that verbs have their own special set of rules, they take aspect markers, they can be negated by boo, they can form these special A, not A questions, you're giving them a powerful predictive toolkit they can actually use to speak correctly.
And all of this leaves us with one final, bigger thought. While the evidence really seems to overwhelmingly show that nouns and verbs are distinct categories in Chinese, this entire debate shines a light on a much deeper question about language itself. Are grammatical rules these absolute ironclad laws, or are they just really, really strong patterns and tendencies? The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, and exploring that gray area is what makes studying language so endlessly fascinating. Thanks for tuning in.